Good morning, fifth grade. Today I'm going to go over the answers for Chapter 7, Lesson 1. So you should have done the opening question here. You could have really listed any three leaders you wanted. It could have been local leaders. It could have been our president. It could have even been leaders in our school like Mrs. Turk or Father Joe's. And then you guys read about Lewis and Clark and their expedition with Sacagawea and how much he helped them. So moving on into lesson 1, this is where you learned about George Washington taking office and becoming our first president. So first, let's start up here with the question at the top of the page. It said to compare the way that the royals of Great Britain dressed, so this is King George III, compared to how the president dressed. So you might have written something like, George Washington doesn't look as fancy. He looked more like a normal guy. And you maybe would have written, George Washington's not a king, he's not royalty, so that's why his clothes are different. Okay, but you learned about George Washington becoming our first president. So he's the only president that we've had that's actually been elected unanimously. So everybody decided that he would be the best president. And George Washington really had a unique problem, or he was in a unique situation because he was our very first president. So he was the one that really had to help figure out how our country is going to run. He had to set up our government. He had to get people to help him run our government. So he really had a tough job because he was the first one to really do it all. And he didn't have an example to follow. So George Washington chose a group of people to help him run the country called his cabinet. So what a cabinet does is they advise the president and help the president make decisions. And all of the people who are part of the cabinet are the secretary of whatever their department is. The only person that has a different name is the attorney general. The attorney general is kind of like the lawyer for the United States. So for number 1, you should have filled in who who George Washington picked for each of these positions. So Alexander Hamilton, he became the Secretary of Treasury, so he became in charge of the country's money. Henry Knox, he became the Secretary of War. He was in charge of protecting our country, running our military. And then Edmund Randolph, he became our Attorney General. So make sure you filled in those boxes correctly. All right. Moving on and learning a little bit more about George Washington's cabinet. Some people in George Washington's cabinet did not get along very much. And 2 of those people were Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. They just really saw things very differently and had a lot of disagreements on how the country should be run and how, what the government should be doing. And these 2 men actually kind of founded our first 2 political parties. So people that started following Jefferson and Hamilton, they split into 2 different parties. So Hamilton's party was called the Federalists, and Thomas Jefferson's party was called the Democratic Republicans. And George Washington was very much against political parties. He didn't think that they were a good idea, and he actually thought that they were going to be a big problem for our country in the future. So he really didn't want people to be forming these political parties, but unfortunately that did happen. All right, so number 2, you had to write a generalization about the kinds of people who have supported each party. So generalization is just like a general statement. So if I was going to make a generalization about Catholic schools, I would say all Catholic school students wear school uniforms. That's a general statement that describes most Catholic school students. So the Federalists were mostly merchants. Okay, there's going to be people who are buying and selling goods. And then Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans, that's mostly going to be farmers, because Thomas Jefferson and his other supporters believed that the country should really rely on farming and being small farmers instead of like big factories or lots of trade. He thought it was more important to be a farmer. So Alexander Hamilton is going to help set up our national bank and do a lot of different things to help our economy. One of the things that he's going to do is he's going to support tariffs. Those are taxes on imported goods. These taxes are going to help raise money for the federal government, and they're going to help American businesses. And then you didn't have to do anything for this chart. They just wanted you to see what Democratic, Republicans, and Federalists would support. While all this is going on too, our nation is building their capital. So Washington, D.C. is being built. George Washington helped to choose its location. Benjamin Banneker, he helped to survey the land and helped to build some parts of Washington, D.C. Also, Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, he was a French engineer. He helped design the streets and the monuments, and there's a plaza named after L'Enfant in D.C. So George Washington never, unfortunately, got to live and work in Washington, D.C. because it wasn't built yet. In 1796, John Adams was elected the country's second president. And then eventually he will eventually move in to Washington, D.C. So John Adams is going to be the first one that lives there. And he actually, he and his wife moved in there even before it was finished being built. Okay, so number 3 asks you to write a generalization about George Washington's actions. So again, just a general statement about what did George Washington do while he was president. Well, most of the things that he did while he was president helped tell the future presidents what to do. Because George Washington was the first president we had, he kind of had to he was the first example. So his example is what later presidents followed. And then number 4 asks you to draft a letter to Alexander Hamilton and tell Alexander Hamilton that you want him to come work for George Washington and be part of his government. So you might have said something like, "Hi, Mr. Hamilton," or "Dear Mr. Hamilton, I'm putting together a group of people to help me. You're really great with money. I really would like you to come to Washington and help me. I would like you to come help me with money." He couldn't go to Washington yet. So it should have been something like that. This was a pretty short lesson. Okay. All right, guys, so let's talk about what is going to be on your quiz for this lesson. So the first thing that you need to know for our quiz on Chapter 7, Section 1 is you need to know what a cabinet is. The cabinet is the group of advisors to the president. And there's actually 2 questions that ask this. So that's why there's only going to be 4 things highlighted. The next thing you need to know is you need to know what a political party is. That's the group of people who have the same beliefs about government. You also need to know what a tariff is. Those are taxes on imported goods. And then the last thing you need to know is about the national bank. You need to know that Washington did set up the national bank in 1791. So he did that to help our economy. So if I asked you, what did Washington do to help the economy? You would tell me he set up a national bank. Okay, and those are the things that you need to know for your quiz. So you need to know this stuff, and then cabinet, and remember, cabinet's going to be asked twice. So make sure you go through your book and you highlight these things so that way you can use it when you take the quiz on Chapter 7, Lesson 1. If you guys have any questions, please email me. I hope you guys are all doing well, and have a great day.